Sid, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely, we're happy to have you. So let's start off by telling the audience a little bit about yourself. You know, where are you from? What do you do? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm originally from the Metro Detroit area, Troy specifically. I am a senior. This is my last year studying at Michigan State University, majoring in human biology on the pre-med track with the goal of applying to medical school sometime in the future and with the goal of becoming a physician.
Nice, nice, nice. You want to be a physician, and so you're a student, you're a senior at Michigan State University. You want to be a physician, and you're studying for the MCAT. You said, and
Correct.
so with all those moving pieces going on in your life, why did you decide that you wanted to be a mentor to a refugee youth?
Yeah, so, and in the context of the physician career role, the aspect of leadership and being able to not only have autonomy of, your patients as a doctor, but, also as a human being, it's important to have communication and being able to sometimes have the role of quote unquote, a father or a brother. And I think that's what Samaritas has allowed me to do by being a mentor for the mentee in part of the Samaritas program that I've been a part of for a year. And in that time, I've definitely enjoyed and seen the growth in me being a mentor for my mentee and kind of how it embodies not only the friendship, but serving as kind of an older brother and maybe, using that as a kind of like a father figure in not only giving, beneficial advice to your mentee, but also being able to hear from their side and perspective of life and using that to better yourself and cultivate, your knowledge and your current foundation of your perception of life.
Okay. So, so it sounds to me like you find there's a lot of gratification that you take away from this process and being a mentor, equally as much as there is gratification for the mentee as well. So it sounds to me like if I understood you correctly, the benefit that you find is the ability to understand someone else's culture and where someone else is coming from, and someone else's experience. Is that accurate? Would you that's essentially the gratification that you find in this process? Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think in that form of gratification, just being able to work with someone of a different ethnic background, let alone someone from a different country who is new to the States, they're very unfamiliar with our ways of life and the speed and processing of, the English language. Not to say that they're not as good as us when it comes to maybe communicating English, but it's more so in the context and the speed of which they're able to both comprehend and articulate the English language. And I think being able to, as someone myself who is of originally a different ethnic background, with someone who's working with a mentee who's not from the States, it's really interesting to see both the similarities and differences of their culture with mine and how I'm able to use their, way of life from living in the States and how they've lived their experiences back in their home country. Sure. To put into perspective of how I can change my way of living or adapt to their unique experiences and sort of better my perception and change my worldview of life and, forming new experiences and experiencing new things.
Sure. Yeah, and it never hurts to be able to understand new things and to experience new things and experience another culture, experience that through a relationship with someone else, right? And it sounds to me that that's what you find a lot of gratifying for sure. So when, so I guess when you think about this process, the onboarding process, when you initially had the interest of wanting to be a mentor and then now it's time for the applications and the onboarding and so on. How's that process like for you? Was it simple, sweet, fast, or difficult, slow? What was that like?
Yeah, and think along with that onboarding process, there's definitely, some confidentiality aspects
Sure.
that go into it. We'll start off first with, I think Miss Stephanie definitely helped with the seamless transition for the onboarding process from, signing particular documentation to, introducing to what the program is about and, what types of requirements and, what to expect as far as the mentor-mentee relationship, which in turn, is rather from what I've, to be expected, which is more of, kind of a friendship kind of experience rather than, being, more of like a leadership process. But in a way, it's, tying both because you're using leadership qualities in the form of a friendship. But that's to say, when we're, backtracking to that onboarding process, when you're spending time with the mentee, there's some aspects, involved with, driving and communicating. And I think from Samaritas' perspective, they take those aspects and make sure everything is up to date from, vehicle registration, insurance, and also documenting, what went on at that particular time and date of, meeting in particular with both myself, the mentor, likewise the mentee as well. And I think combining those two aspects of making sure, having a working vehicle and documenting and logging both the hours and what kind of experience was encountered in terms of the details goes a long way in making sure that the mentee feels both safe and he or she feels that their experience is met to standards. And the same goes, for both myself and the Samaritas employees.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. And so I'm thinking a little bit more in a little bit more detail, and this kind of is connected to the previous question about the gratification that you took away from that you take away from this process. And I'm thinking, first of all, how old are you now?
21.
You're 21, and you're turning 22
End of December.
at the end of December.
Pretty close,
Happy,
yeah.
Happy early birthday.
Thank you.
So are you a Christmas baby by chance?
December 29th, so just ahead of Christmas.
Okay, good. So I'm thinking a little bit about, okay, so you're 21, turning 22. I guess first, there's a couple questions that come to mind. First of all, in regards to the age gap between, say, you and your current youth, or it's like, is there a large gap? And if there is a large gap, how does that, affect maybe the relationship between you and your youth, that your mentee? So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the age gap between myself and my mentee is 3 years, but it rather seems as if we are rather both mature for our ages. And I say that in a way because before coming into Samaritas, I definitely would say I was, not as mature as I was, but I think, seeing myself grow into this program and just certain aspects, I think, come with age. And, that can range from, awareness all the way to listening abilities and eye contact. And I think some of these more simpler forms of, nonverbal cues in communication, I think, go a long way in the mentor and mentee relationship, in that being able to both listen and hear out what a mentee has to say, because both of our, English speaking and comprehension levels are different. And while they may not be vastly different, saying they're different is an understatement. And I think it goes a very long way to being able to both understand and listen thoroughly, and, saying not only the appropriate words, but meaningful words. And that kind of forms the, quote unquote, meaningful conversations and how we view, other people's culture, perception, and how they view language in, the universe, in the context of both speech, production and comprehension.
Sure, yeah. So you brought up the topic about language. do you find communication, because these are children that are coming from other countries, uh, do you find communication fairly simple, or do you find it challenging? Some of these children may speak multiple languages. Some of them, their English might be okay. Some of them, their English might not be that great. Some of them, their English might be great, fantastic, right? So, do you what's your experience when it came to communication and language specifically?
Yeah, at least with my mentee, speaking from experience,
Yeah.
English, not only in his native country, but for himself, was his second language.
Okay.
But he's always been, articulate and comprehending English to a pretty good level. And to say from my experience speaking, the English language with him, it's more so about, speaking from my end, more clearly, a little bit more slowly, and being, articulate with the words. And then from his perspective, being able to, understand his side of his experiences. And I think for him, that could mean, speaking a little bit more slowly, or, using a different context of English verbiage. And I think from my, perspective, that has allowed me throughout my time in the year of Samaritas, seeing my growth in, doing more listening and hearing, and sort of understanding what he has to say in maybe more simpler English, words and diction that he might use. And that's allowed me to, say the appropriate words, and being able to speak more clearly and communicate more effectively, and also understand, I think, more. You understand more when you listen, and you hear more when a mentee speaks, and that just helps you to know what to speak properly depending on the context of the situation. I think that goes both ways, and that's kind of the benefit I've gained from being able to work with someone from a different culture and ethnic group,
Sure.
hearing their way of communicating and understanding the English language.
That's awesome. Yeah. Going back to a question that I asked you previously, in terms of like the gratification, but beyond, just more deeper than just gratification, really, the question that I want to get to is why, like the word why, right? Why, well, maybe even a better question to ask even before why is how. Like, how did you get become aware about this program, the Mentor Mentee program? And then after becoming aware of the program, why did you feel that this was right for you to do? So how and why?
Two-part question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, well, first off, I'll start with how I found out about Samaritas. And I would say I was luckily and grateful to be found out about this program through my mother.
Okay.
Yeah, and then that second part of your question is how the mentor-mentee experience has not only built through, resulting in, gratification, but what I have to, take away from it, in other words. And
Sure.
I think, touching up on that question, working with another mentee, and sort of the whole process in going from onboarding and forming, that relationship. And I think it might start off, with definitely a little bit of silence, a little bit of unfamiliarity, but I think, there's just some aspects of life that go along with the mentor-mentee relationships. And, it starts off with a little bit of silence,
Silence, yeah.
a little bit of, getting experience to the exposure of your surroundings and the context of the situation, and just sort of getting to know a little bit about yourself. And then slowly from there, and, I think communication really plays a big part, being able to set, specific days, what works best for not only yourself, but you also have to look at it from the mentee's perspective, because they too, like us, have a life, and they're also going to be busy with either, paid work, class work, and also things outside their life, much like we do. And it's important to take that into context. But I think, part of that, relationship and mentorship is to, learn from that. And that goes with the, universal life quality of patience,
Sure.
being patient in understanding, not only how busy they are, but, being patient in the context of the situation. It could just be as simple as being aware of your surroundings or being aware when they're speaking and how slowly or quickly they're speaking. And that in turn can give you a better idea of knowing how to respond, to their, statements or even questions they might have about yourself or questions they might have about, their own life. And I think, the concept of what and purpose of Samaritas that is brought into the mentor-mentee relationship has to do subjectively, communication, building, a more reputable relationship between mentor and mentee, and the leadership qualities that the mentor sort of embodies and sets as a standard for the mentee. And I think, tying that all together, what can be learned from this is not only, friendship matters in this relationship, but you're also gaining a lot of cultural, situational, and awareness in both, verbal and nonverbal communication at the end of the day.
Sure, yeah. And how long have you been a mentor?
So I started as a mentor with the onboarding process in August to September of 2023, and I became a mentor as soon as November of 2023, and I've been doing it since. And one thing I've definitely have taken away from this is Samaritas, highly recommends, in meeting the mentee once a month. And sometimes, maybe that requirement isn't met. It might be every other month or even once a month, I think is perfectly okay.
Sure.
But one thing from the meeting, the mentee is the time being spent and the quality of the time rather than the quantity or the hours of time, really making that quality of time in the conversations, and as simple as, maybe going on walks together, grabbing a meal together, or going on a drive together and enjoying, both the, silence as well as the conversations. It goes both ways, gained from, sharing these experiences, whether it be in a private or a more public social setting.
Sure.
Between mentor and mentee.
Yeah, absolutely. So what would you say to someone, what advice would you give to someone who is interested in being a mentor? What's one or two things that you might give them in terms of advice?
Yeah, so, and from experience, from what I've learned, and I could even advise myself to even do better on this. And I'm still learning, and I definitely say I've come a long way since being a mentor at Samaritas. But I think if we were to break it down into just a few simple points, I think one is communication is key.
Okay.
I think being precise in, when you plan to meet, but also, what you want to do. Because I think if you have a general idea of what you want to do and what time you want to meet, it just makes the experience, a lot less stressful, and you're both able to enjoy it. I think two is definitely have to be patience. This definitely takes some time to get used to, but I think patience goes a long way. Maybe more so from the mentor side, because it might be difficult to be, putting your shoes into a mentee. But from at least your perspective, being more patient in both verbal and nonverbal communication, in both listening to what, the mentee is talking about, whether it be, them answering a question you may have, or them, talking in general. Patience goes a long way. And I think patience builds on to being able to articulate, and that's my third point, in having effective and meaningful communication, in not only knowing what you want to say, but also how that may benefit the mentee. And that goes both for verbal and nonverbal communication. And at least from my experience, one thing I at least helped me in my, mentor-mentee relationship is not using my phone. I think maybe, using your phone when you're paying for something, or maybe putting your directions, to a particular location, whether it might be, where they live to pick them up, or, to a restaurant or even somewhere else. But, having that, human and face-to-face connection is really, I think, beneficial, and you gain so much experience and exposure that you wouldn't be able to otherwise, when you're on your phone. And I think that's the beauty of human connection you don't get out of your phones, is you're able to experience so much, both cultural, situational, and even personal interactions that you won't get, out of a Google search, because each person's view of life and perception of different things is subjective. And I think that's kind of what I've learned is, just leaving my phone in my pocket or even in the car, and having someone to talk to is really, so beneficial in today's world with all the technology, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I was definitely going to say that in our hyper social media era, phone, not being on your phone 24/7 can be challenging for sure. But it is good to be able to set it aside once in a while, just to be able to connect and build relationships with people. And so that's good for sure. And so it sounds like when you're with your mentee, you want to make sure you maximize the time that you're with them, which is which requires reducing obviously the distractions that are present for sure. And so what about the challenges? What about any particular challenges that you can think of in this process at all, that you, in your experience?
So maybe some challenges I've encountered, at least, this could be more so from the mentor side, when you're rather busy and maybe setting time to even meet with the mentee might be a little bit more difficult. So I'd say on your end, it's kind of best to at least know when you're available and then plan, I think, rather a little bit more well ahead of time. That way you can give the mentee some, working time to decide what works best for him or her in terms of creating a plan and schedule. And I think that just goes both ways in really, like you were saying earlier, making the most out of the time. And that's what works for, I think, in having the most out of the experience in Samaritas, is being able to set aside time in which what works not only best for your day, but their day as well. And that creates for just a more positive yet stress-free experience.
That's good. Overall, what has your experience been like? Just on a macro level, 30,000 foot view. What is your experience? What would you say your experience has been like? Just within the mentoring program here at Samaritas.
Yeah, and I think my experience in Samaritas, and it's definitely a lot more of a friendship kind of relationship. Given myself and maybe many others, they have friends who are born and raised within the States, and even like myself, their families may not have been born or raised here, but it's a completely different story when you're working and also being a friend to another person who isn't from this country. Let alone they haven't had the experiences or the knowledge or staying up to date with the times of the American states. And I think being able to hear their side and how they, perform their verbal and nonverbal communication and, their, social cues is quite different from when we interact with our own friends who are born and raised here. And that just gives a completely different perspective on life and how we have to tailor and adapt our behaviors and not only our thinking, but also our, social cues and verbal and nonverbal communication when talking with different people. But also it can be applied when talking with anybody. It could be anyone from a similar or different culture, whether or not they may be born or raised in the States. But I think it goes a long way when you're talking with someone from a different culture. That could be let alone like my mentee who isn't born in the States, or someone, who has friends that may be born in the States. But you gain so much insight of a cultural standpoint and also a language comprehension from working with a mentee here at Samaritas.
That's good. Well, Sid, thank you so much for your time and your experience. We are honored just to have you a part of this program and just your service to your mentee. It's we really you're really we're just really honored just to have you here within our program, and I know that your mentee is equally honored and blessed to have you in his life or his life. Is that correct?
His life.
His life. So once again, just thank you so much for your just what you do, and thank you so much for sharing your experience today with us. So thank you again. So,
Likewise, and I'm grateful definitely for this opportunity. And these questions quite meaningful they are because it's important to understand the aspects of both as I mentioned earlier, verbal and nonverbal communication in the context of different scenarios
yeah.
when working with someone from a different cultural, and it's very direct in kind of a very friendly friendship matter, and it really teaches you how to be a leader in that way when you're being a friend to someone from a different culture, but you're kind of guiding them and showing them things that they may not be familiar with. And that's kind of the direction that Samaritas takes with leadership in being able to form that kind of close tie friendship, and showing those experiences that you might have more of that you're able to share with that they might not have familiarity with, and that kind of embodies what Samaritas is about in mentor mentee.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think the one final thought that just comes to mind is one of the things that I think sticks out the most about your experience is the fact that the gratification in how you as the mentor find so much benefit in this process, and what you take from this process. And I think that being highlighted is what sticks out the most to me from your experience, because we do hear a lot. I think it's clear how the mentee benefits in the sense that they get a friend, in the sense that they get someone to teach them the ins and outs of how this American system works and teach them and have fun with them and go get ice cream with them, go get lunch with them, that type of stuff, right? Is very advantageous from the mentee perspective, but to also hear it from the mentor perspective is, I think, what sticks out the most to me, hearing it from your story, and to even to go deeper in that, it's where else can you people love to travel, right? People love to travel and go to other countries, but what other vehicle is there to be able to, if you don't have the ability to jump in your car or jump in a plane and travel to El Salvador or Colombia or anywhere else, somewhere in Africa, to go travel, what other vehicle is there that will enable you to have to be able to learn, right? To be able to learn and experience another culture through a relationship that you're building with someone else who has been in that culture, who knows what the food is like, right? Sure, you're not gonna eat the food, right? But someone who can tell you a little bit about that experience. So it's not traveling in the fullest sense of the term traveling, right? But if there is anything that's if there is something that will allow you to be able to get a slight glimpse of what that might look like, it seems to me like this mentor-mentee program gives you a little bit about that experience as well, if that makes sense. Would you say that is accurate, would you say?
Yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah.
As you were saying earlier, they are not very familiar with the American way of life, or maybe how the system of day and night works, because it's always constantly different for each and every individual here living. And so I think being able to show new places and exposure to different kinds of social environments within even the city of East Lansing.
Sure.
I think it's just a beautiful thing to show in this mentor-mentee experience. And even myself, I'm exposing myself to, new kinds of experiences and, different environments and places, and having the kind of quote unquote independence and freedom to being able to schedule and plan out what I want to do with my mentee really benefits the both of us in having to experience different social cues. And that's not something you can always, do with maybe your friends of the, who've been brought up in the States. They might be very one-sided into doing something or the other. And so I think having the autonomy and just being able to choose something and experience it, not only for yourself, but it's a completely, different, perception that the mentee may also have. And I'm sure they enjoy it. And while they may not be as expressive with it, they sure, are enjoying and cherishing every moment, whether how big or small that may be.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you again so much for your time, Sid. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, we hope that you've enjoyed this session with me and Sid. Please, if you haven't done so already, please take a chance to like this video and subscribe to this channel. We will see you next time. Sweet. Thank you, Sid.